Hello and welcome to the Undoctored podcast. I am Saurabh and I'm here with my classmate Suryadev. And we are both doctors. We have studied our undergraduate from NJMS Varda. And Surya will now tell us why we are starting a podcast.
Yeah, so basically, why we decided to go on this venture and start a podcast is because uh, throughout our hostel days, before we passed MBBS and went our separate ways for coaching and whatever, we used to have daily hostel discussions and with our batchmates and even amongst us. Even the day before our university exams, we used to spend discussing various things on different topics. So we both decided that if we recorded this and try to share this with the community and also get your views on this, so it would broaden not only means our thoughts can be shared and it may prove to be useful to some of you, either medical graduates or even the public, depending on the topics we discuss. And more than that, it would also be enriching for us, like to go and share our thoughts also. So we decided to start this. Right now we have just decided on the name and somewhat structured this first episode. So we are planning a few of these discussion with both a discussion type sort of podcast episodes with both of us here, and some also like interviews with some people we found to be interesting that we would like
Or
to
may
share with the
find
rest
to
of the
be.
world, or may find to be interesting. So this is planned for the future. We haven't decided any specific, probably a monthly or a bi-monthly episode. We haven't decided much of it. So let's start with today's episode. So we have decided the topic of today's episode as medical history. So what is medical history and why have we chosen this topic, Saurabh?
So, normally we like the first thing we should get out of the way is that this is not the history taking that we are used to in our
Rounds.
UG as
Uh,
in our
yeah.
UG this thing. So, medical history, means the reason which I found this very interesting is that we are exposed to a lot of very dry concepts and like rote learning things in our UG life. So, there are a number of genes in pathology which you need to mug up. There are a number of surgical procedures. There are a lot of things. Uh, the thing which I found makes it easier for me to remember and then kind of retain those things is knowing the story of how these things came to be like the things they are today. So, for example, if there is any surgical procedure, so what problem did the surgeon experience at that time and how he went about solving it? For example, if this is a new drug which I need to remember, so I'll find it easier to remember if I know what problems there were before the drug was in place. If there are some genes in pathology, so I'll be very interested to know how those genes became, like how those genes were named. What is the concept behind naming the gene, or like there must be
Yeah.
something which was just totally a fun thing for the pathologist to name and then it stuck. So there are a lot of things which we don't know. There is a very interesting side of medicine which we more often than not fail to recognize or see.
Yes.
We just end up mugging these names and means that is
Yeah.
very boring for us. So
Basically,
that is
what has
why.
happened is, yeah, you can continue.
So that is
Yeah.
why basically medical history is a
Yeah,
very
so
interesting thing. And
what basically has happened is when we were in 9th, 10th, or even 11th, 12th, we were so fascinated by the world of science and we always felt social science and history is so boring. But once we enter medical school, we are surrounded by all these facts and all these heavy concepts, and history, in a sense, becomes the interesting part somewhat of medicine other than the clinical and surgical aspects of it. So obviously there is it is very vast, right? And there is a reason it's not part of our daily curriculum. Maybe it is not as helpful in our day-to-day clinical practice. So,
or our
but
academics also.
even in our
Like
academics, it's not evaluated
nobody
that
is going
heavily.
to ask us the history of this particular
I
thing
am
if we
not
are
sure
just going to
about
ask.
that. I mean, in community medicine, or Gore committee,
Yeah.
all the committees. There are many
Anyway,
things
but
where history can be
means
asked also,
the
right?
things we will be talking about will
Yeah.
definitely not be asked in any
We'll
exam.
be talking about the things which we found interesting, and we
Interesting.
both have this knack for just falling into the pits of history instead of reading and revising what we should be revising sometimes. But in the long run, it does provide us with a different dimension of thinking, I guess, and it helps improve our creativity. And sometimes learning history can really benefit us when we face like the day-to-day problems or new challenges, right, which haven't been experimented. So how these minds or even how various drugs or various processes just came into being, it may not even make sense. It must just be a flow of events, right? History doesn't have to make sense. So
Exactly.
that while medicine has to make sense, I mean, there are a few aspects which where it doesn't need to make sense as well. But so we found it interesting, and we thought this would be a good place to start. So both of us have chosen a topic each, and all the sources we have used
Hmm.
while researching this, we have tried to collect those sources, and we are putting down all the links in the description. So if anyone is curious, like our podcast name is Undoctored, so we aren't doctor. We are trying our best not to doctor anything.
My
and
point is that we will try to like stick to the facts as much as possible, but of course, in this day and age, one
Yeah,
cannot be too sure. And
there will
if we
definitely
make
be
any
some
like,
paraphrasing
yeah,
or some
right.
butchering of terminology or pronunciation, so please be kind to us in the comments.
So I'll be starting with surgery as a topic in medical history because I'm really interested in that topic. So we'll be talking about a person named William Stewart Halsted, after which the modified radical mastectomy is the procedure, surgical procedure is
MRM,
named MRM.
right?
It is used in breast cancer, as we all know, as medicos. So William Stewart Halsted was born on September 23 in 1852. He was born in Manhattan, and he was born actually in a very rich household. His father was also a doctor, and he was a child of privilege. So after his schooling, he initially went on to pursue the fine arts at a very prestigious university, where he's said to be a very mediocre student, and it was not it is mentioned there that there is not one record of him buying borrowing a book from this college's library for the 3 years he was there.
My
But he
God.
was an exceptional athlete there, and he was participating in numerous sports. He was a very outgoing person, had a lot of friends. He was, the popular guy kind of person.
Mhm.
So only in his senior years did Halstead interest in medicine awaken. So he took classes in anatomy and then physiology, and he was basically entranced by medicine. He entered the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which would later go on to become Columbia's medical school. And he then graduated among the top 10 in class. And this basically started a series of academic achievements. Halstead would basically ace every exam that he appeared for. I
My
guess
God.
this is more because the guy found his what he was passionate about, and then it brought out the best in him. So
Mm.
after his initial training in the field of medicine, he went on to explore the advancements of surgery occurring in Europe. So Europe was a place where the surgery was advancing at a whole new level. There were new discoveries being made in anatomical and on an anatomical level. The concept of antisepsis was being developed there. So Europe was at a very much like a higher level when compared to the US in the field of surgery. So after his whole this was largely funded by his whole family money and all. But after returning from USA, he was very he returned a much wiser man. But he was surprised to find out how rigid American physicians were to accept this new concepts and knowledge.
Mm.
But Halstead was a very resilient person. He did not give up, and
So he was
soon he
also, matlab, very stubborn. I mean, in general,
yeah,
I feel
exactly. So that is
doctors in general are also very stubborn to implement. Even now, we are not
doctors
ready
even
to
now
update
the
ourselves.
concept of evidence-based medicine. Nobody wants to be proven wrong or something, or they
Yeah,
always believe that
they like to
they have
stick
it
with
right.
their.
And
Yeah,
this, we can all comfort ourselves with the knowledge that this is the way that it has always been.
definitely.
It is the only
Yeah.
thing that we can do. Anyway, so he was a very talented physician. He, as we saw, he aced every exam he took, and then as a result of which he was enlisted in a lot of hospitals. Like
Okay.
I think there were at a point of time between 1880 to 1886, he was recruited at six different hospitals at varying capacities.
My
So
God.
there are a lot of different like great things that he did. His image was that of a very bold, a very fast surgeon. Like he was at the top of his field at that time. So there are a lot of like chronicles, like there are a lot of legendary things that he did. Some of which include doing the first appendicectomy in New York and doing the first person-to-person transfusion and also the first auto transfusion of blood
Okay.
in New York. And among his very extraordinary achievements was his sister was suffering from postpartum hemorrhage and
Okay.
was in a critical condition. And Halsted, on seeing her, he immediately transfused his own blood into her, and following which she made an immediate recovery. So it was, I guess, it was lucky because they had the same blood type, or else this would have been
Same,
a
or
really different
maybe
story.
like she had a donor, means a receiver
Yeah,
type.
exactly, or something like that must have happened. My point is that
Hmm.
Halstead was a person like in this phase he acted first and thought afterwards is what like I'm
Like
getting
most
this vibe
surgeons.
like probably this he exactly fits the stereotype, you know. He's a
Yes,
crazy guy basically.
definitely.
Another one of his very extraordinary this thing means tale is that he operated on his own mother on the kitchen table of their house. So this was the first cholecystectomy to be ever have been like to ever be being done. So
My
she was
God.
suffering from acute cholecystitis. Like she had a history of long history of treatment, nothing got better. So Halsted operated his own mother on their own kitchen table, and she made a complete recovery. So we can all like I'm trying to paint this picture of Halsted in this period as a very outgoing person. He had a lot of friends. He's a very bold person. He's not afraid to take risks. He's fast.
Right.
He thinks fast. He acts fast. And then this is what he always stays on the cutting edge. So as a person always on the cutting edge of his field, he became aware of a type of a particular new drug which would numb the sensation to pain when injected over the site of surgery. And it was during this phase that anesthesia was introduced. So before this phase, patients had to be held down screaming while procedures were being performed, and it was a very macabre branch. Like people
And
more
also
often
that
than
would
not
limit your surgical aspect, right? Like how
outcome
you
also,
do it.
yeah. So
Yeah.
means it was often thought like if you take a patient to the table, he's already dead. Like
Right.
he's no better than dead. And so there is no concept of pain control. There is no concept of infection control. So more often than not, the outcome was very bad.
Poor.
The whole
Hmm.
experience of surgery was very bad. So people were always interested in drugs that would numb pain. Halsted was, of course, he was on the cutting edge of surgery. He read about this paper and he ordered a large amount of this drug. And together with some colleagues, they got to using it. So they initially researched like about this drug due to lack of test subject. Probably they tested on their own, like they tested on each other, and
Right.
the results were very promising also. So there are a lot of manuscripts which detail about 2,000 minor surgical procedures being done with this drug. But unfortunately,
My
the
God.
drug they were researching was cocaine, which at that time was a widely used additive in tonics. So it was used in Coca-Cola and even some wines.
Right.
So it was also used as a treatment of morphine and alcohol addiction. Of course, what people did not understand at that time is that they were replacing one addiction with another.
And a
Anyway,
much
so
more severe one as well
exactly,
compared
yeah.
to.
So Halsted and his group had designed experiments where they injected these drugs in each other with cocaine hydrochlorate. Like that was the compound they used, and it blocked the sensory nerves, and of course they got the results they wanted. But the unfortunate part was that Halsted succumbed to this drug. And one thing that I would like to point out here is that they did not do it like you know people do it in these times. So it was not because of but because like taking that drug caused them a higher
Not
something like.
voluntary, I guess.
They did not
Like
do it
they
voluntarily. They were
experimented and got physically dependent on it. So then
dependent, and
it's,
once you are
yeah.
dependent, I guess it is really difficult. So this is just my defense for in his defense. So
Mm,
anyway, so he did succumb to this drug, and then as did other of his colleagues. Like two of them, it is written that two of them were dead within months.
my God.
So after this, after he's being dependent, so his academic and teaching interest declined. So earlier he was a very outgoing person. He used to take great joy in teaching and all such activities. There is account of all like him starting a new residency program. Not residency per se. There was no concept of residency back then. But then they
Mm,
did teach students, and those students aced every exam. Like they were
okay.
very good. The results were very good for those students. So he took great joy in teaching and all, but since he was dependent, it all declined and went downhill. He published some paper in a journal, which was
Mm,
so irrational and incoherent that
okay.
he basically lost his job, and he came to understand that the New York did not hold any more prospects for him. So the time was right for him to like change his place
How
of
did they
practice.
publish the paper if there was no scrutiny? Or
I
because
guess
it's Halstead,
Halsted,
Halstead,
Halsted, yeah, means that
Halstead.
person did have an aura around him.
Yes.
I'll come to this part later, like what happened, like
Okay.
after the death of Halsted.
Okay.
So after that, he like this was the downhill, like this is the rock bottom Halsted did, and
Right.
he did reach out to some friends, and one of his friends they invited him to Baltimore. So there was this place, John Hopkins, which was being started. So Halsted left everything. He left his old life behind and then went to John Hopkins to start afresh. So he's considered one of the founding fathers of John Hopkins,
John
as we
Hopkins.
know.
John Hopkins.
Yeah,
Mm,
so one of the biggest, largest hospitals today. So there he started afresh, and it is here that he did most of his like great work, like what we are going to remember him for today, like
mm,
what my topic is for today. So the first thing, like which he did was like over the course of his career, he would go on to do a lot of things. So there is this whole list that he like he he
right.
he he devised new methods of surgery for abdominal aneurysms, femoral aneurysms, and n number of
Okay.
things. But what I will be covering here today are three things: his technique of meticulous surgery,
Right.
his discovery of the finer instruments of surgery, and one
Mm,
of the most interesting, he was the first person to use gloves in surgery. So
right.
this is actually a very interesting story. So his wife was a nurse, a scrub nurse in the operation theater.
Mm,
So this was before their marriage, I guess. So obviously he must have had some sort of interest in her. I don't know like what his dynamic was earlier, but
okay.
in a journal he noted that the nurses' hands, the scrub nurses' hands, were being damaged due to the chemicals of the
Right.
antiseptics which were used.
Antiseptics.
And of
Okay.
course, Halstead was a big person, in favor of antisepsis at that time.
Right.
So it is on this note, I forgot to add one point. While he was in this, pre-addiction phase, so he
Right.
convinced the hospital to spend at least about like tens of thousands of dollars uh, to erect a separate enclosure, like a tent-like structure for him to practice surgery in. A
My
very
God.
very huge amount of investment uh,
For
at that time,
sterility
like
means for
yeah, yeah,
like
for
so that
practicing
he
his
could do his
principle of
own
antisepsis.
level of antisepsis.
Exactly.
Okay.
He could control more, I guess. But the reason that I added this is it is not very easy for like a person to get a hospital to commit such huge amounts of money. And
Mhm.
Halstead did it, which goes on to paint his picture like of a very, you know,
Powerful.
think first and like do first and think later kind of person. So
Right.
anyway, we are at John Hopkins, and he's seeing a scrub nurse, which is her hands are being damaged due to these chemicals. So he reached out to the Goodyear, the rubber company, and they designed
Okay.
him some latex gloves. And then
Okay.
he saw that the infection rates also fell down, and then of course the hands of his future wife were very pretty. And then,
Right.
so this is also thought to be the first chronicling of a love story in a medical journal.
Okay.
So he was
Okay.
talking to
Because
about his future wife in that
uh,
journal. So this is a, I guess
maybe
it is a
first and
romantic
last
part
as
of it.
well. It's who would chronicle
So there,
there.
there must have been instances which
Probably, yeah.
we might,
We'll
okay,
have to
we
look
might
into
come
that.
across in future episodes.
Definitely.
Anyway, so this was his one achievement as at John Hopkins. A surgeon, like after his addiction, like even while he was being dependent on cocaine. So there was a change in his demeanor. So of course there would be some unexplained absences and a lot of eccentricity. So it is said that he sent his clothes to for washing and laundering to Paris,
Yeah, yeah.
and
That though means in
his
that
his
time.
clothes.
I don't know if
So
that is
that
eccentric though.
but again it's like he was a weird guy, I guess. Anyway, so
That is his taste, right? I mean, he's earning so much. I don't know how much he used to charge. I heard he was one of the most
yeah,
expensive surgeons
I
as well,
also
right?
heard that, but again I do not have sources to back that up, so I did not mention this here. Yeah,
Okay.
so as we did mention that he was a very talented surgeon, so I guess people must have paid top dollar for his surgery.
Yeah.
Another one of his achievements is that like he devised very fine instruments to handle tissues. So the mosquito forceps which we use today
Right.
is designed by Halsted, and there is this record of him using about 250 of these forceps, like 250 forceps for a single
My
radical
God.
mastectomy. So again, it is during this phase and period that he devised a lot of new surgeries. So he
For a
conceived an
radical mastectomy, 250 is like, well, so much, right? I mean,
कहाँ
for a
कहाँ लगा
C-section,
like where
I don't know. My
मतलब
God.
I read this about in a journal. Will link it below, obviously.
Right.
So it was during this phase at John Hopkins that he conceived a radical mastectomy for breast cancer. He devised an operation for the cure of inguinal hernia, and
Okay.
there was a first successful ligation of the subclavian artery and excision of the subclavian aneurysm. He also did first three choledochotomies in the United States of America.
Okay.
And again, like there are n number of surgeries, which again will link the sources to below. Again, my point is, he even in this phase of being like using cocaine and being addicted, he did not lose his touch. So slowly and surely, Halstead went on to transform the field of surgery as we know it. Uh, but what did happen was he became a very slow and meticulous surgeon. So,
Right.
which again proves, is a
The
tale, is
effect
a
of
cautionary
addiction.
tale for, it might be the effect of addiction, but I read it as a cautionary tale for today's like surgeons. So we incentivize time. We say that this
Hmm.
surgeon did a hernia in 20 minutes, this surgeon did. But Halstead did his best work while he was being a slow, meticulous surgeon and not the very fast, bold kind of person that a
Right.
maverick kind of this.
Okay.
So a person earlier, as we saw that surgery was a very barbaric branch. So tissues were not
Hmm.
handled with respect. The handling of tissue with respect is thought to begin after Halstead. So he it is like I read somewhere that he told his future students and all, he if you touch the intestine you injure it. So use touch it judiciously.
Right.
So this
So
was a
lot of
line that moved me because yeah.
right. And I think means like he's like in John Hopkins, right? So he must be. So was his teaching and these stuff also affected because of all this addiction and uh
So another probably the best like his gift to surgery was his whole residency program. So
okay.
it is during this resident like it was during this phase that okay, Halstead was gone a lot. Okay, so there have been like instances where he was gone for 2, 3, 5 months and there was no notice of him. So you can look look about it in two ways. Okay. So Halstead, as we all know, had an interest in surgery. Hmm. He devised like most of what our residency program is like in surgery is devised
Right.
by Halstead. Okay.
Okay.
So if future residents they ever get scolded and have are having a bad day, they know who to curse.
Pretty much
uh,
like Osler for
Pretty
medicine.
much like Osler for medicine, exactly. So
Hmm.
the students of Halstead, like they were like superhumans, like much like the man himself. And it is a criticism and it is a reproach of the general method of surgical training that it was devised by a cocaine addict, and that
Right.
is the reason that it is so hard and so difficult to get through. So you can read it as a criticism of this field,
But it
but
hasn't changed and it seems to be working. I mean, you have good surgeons now also, so
we have good surgeons now, and
I don't know about the
uh,
residency program though, I guess that is there for
uh,
sure.
that yeah, but my point is that another way that we can see this thing is that Halstead needed this residency program to function as a clinician, because it was
Hmm.
clear that he could not take on everything, and
Right.
means he was doing massive amounts of surgery at that time. Like I have read accounts where he was standing for 16, 17 hours straight without food, without anything, and he
My
was
God.
operating. So no person can last this long, and everybody has a limit. So Halstead reached his limit, and then it was time to pass the baton and all. So
Right.
that is why surgical residency program came to into being as we know today.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So again, two faces to this. It was probably what Halstead needed, or it was probably due to his the whole
Yeah.
wild side, like
Right.
he had a lot of energy to burn, and that is why he recruited a lot of residents. Either way, so moving on, but all this, like all good things must come to an end. So talking about his death, so it was
Right.
actually a very cruel irony that he had to die of a complication of like acute cholecystitis. So
Correct.
he was
Okay.
operated by his own students, no less. uh,
Okay.
uh, about two, I think it was he was operated twice, and in the middle he did make a complete recovery, but
Okay.
yeah, he did succumb to the operation, like the disease
My
which
God.
he was the first one to cure. So
My God.
this was the life of Halstead.
Right.
More like I would like to add something after his death. What became after his death? Every student that he had trained, most of them took up teaching jobs, and
Okay.
they went on to set up the whole system of residency that we see today. So,
Right.
like even in his death, Halstead looms large, and we see him everywhere in every medical college. Like if a
Right.
PG is being trained by his senior, so this is because of Halstead. And there was also like his all his students were like him, like they were very famous for their endurance. Again, 16,
Okay.
17 hours, no break and no food, no water. They
So
were
they also
Halstedian,
must have
like
their own like contributions as well. Like,
yeah, means there are a lot of these things. I guess Harvey Cushing was one student,
okay.
and again I link the means I'll
Okay.
give the
So Cushing is like a
sources in the
neuro
description. I
specialist,
guess
right?
so, yeah, he was a neurosurgeon, and he went on
Okay.
to there was this Cushing's reflex or something, like Cushing's ulcers
Yeah,
or
we have
something.
read it.
Uh,
Yeah.
so my point is, after I read this about in a book that radical mastectomy is not necessary in every case of breast cancer, right? So
Right.
this is a very modern kind of like this is a fairly recent belief which the Holstedians were not ready to accept. And
Hmm.
as like true to their master, they were very stubborn,
Okay.
and uh, they took a lot of convincing. But again, the what I want to highlight here is the quality that they all inherited from their teacher, is that endurance, and then be stubborn, be
And that
resistant.
time means we did not have much idea about these diseases that they are treating surgically as well, right?
Again, yeah,
We didn't have
again,
staging, we didn't have imaging, wasn't that developed, I guess.
exactly. So
So it makes
this
sense. Like you see a growth, you want to remove it completely because it's coming back
exactly.
again and again.
And,
So
again, which means we do have a tendency to do what we have been taught, right? Like
yeah,
if my sir did it like this and I
human
do it
nature,
like this, whatever
right?
your evidence. So again, the rigidity of clinicians. But yeah, so this was the life and the contributions of Halsted to the field of surgery,
Amazing,
and
really.
that is
A
that
great
is
person
what
that
I have.
probably changed, influenced all medicos and any majority of health providers, at least.
Health providers, exactly. So uh, his whole, like, just to recap his major achievements, he was
Right.
the first person to be credited with a blood transfusion,
Yeah.
which he did on his own sister while she was in a critical condition. He was the first person to do a cholecystectomy, to do a cholecystectomy, you know, and
Okay.
he was the first person to, devise fine instruments, give some respect to the tissues that they deserve. He was the first person to introduce gloves into surgery. He was
So
probably the
many.
first person to write his love story in a medical journal.
I don't know. I feel like we are romanticizing his true effort in bringing in gloves. Even if it wasn't his wife, his main goal was quite different. I mean, I guess we'll never
Yeah.
know what his intention was there.
But yeah, so in his last, like in his during his stay in John Hopkins, he did reach out to Osler as a friend, and to confront his problem of dependence. He was
Right.
never said to be. It is said that he was never free of dependence. So at
Okay.
that time, again, morphine was used to treat cocaine addiction, which is again swapping one addiction for another. So he
Yeah.
thought to be addicted to morphine also. The point which I wanted to highlight was, despite being addicted to these substances, he was such a disciplined person that he kept functioning. He gave all he could to surgery, and then again, the rest, as we say, is history. So this was Halstead, William Stewart Halstead, as a person,
It's
and
amazing to know about these people. I mean, it also gives you a picture of the surgical scene at that time, right? And how
yeah,
things developed and
and
how
how things
grateful we should
developed, and
be
then
actually right now for how we just do
exactly.
surgeries on a daily basis without thinking so much. Back
If
then, it
we
was not the
if we
same.
extract if we extract a
Yeah,
small lump from your forehead, and then we have a lot of persons to thank.
right. Okay, so that was
So
quite interesting. Right. So I guess we can go ahead
pause.
to my topic now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my topic is on basically you had covered like scientists and means the life of a scientist, right? So I thought I would take a different direction. And also it shows like history has various ways to study it, right? So I have taken the history of a drug basically. And it may not be as relevant to daily practice. There may not be as many enlightening or interesting points. It's just a natural course. And this basically points out the boring side of history as well, but also the means like the mystery of it, that all these chances and random things just keep happening, and not random as well, it's just a slow flow. So my history of this drug basically starts 400 years back, 400, 500 years back, 500 years back with the discovery of the country of Peru. So in 1513, so around the end of the 15th century, Columbus and all those things happened, right? The Americas are discovered. And one of the countries in Southern America, especially towards the northwestern coast of northwestern side of Southern America, is Peru, right? So Peru, like, what do you know, Saurabh, about like Peru? What have you heard about Peru? Anything?
Peru, I've not heard much, but Peru, I think, is a very like touristy place. There are some
Right.
places, the Machu Picchu, something, I don't know.
Yeah, Machu Picchu is in Peru. So basically, Machu Picchu is like a citadel type. It's a
Okay.
almost like a wonder of the world, I think. Not sure, but so
There are
there
there
was a
are some
huge
volcanic. regions also.
Yeah, I think so.
Volcan.
Basically, yeah, there is a huge hill range there called the Andes of
Okay.
South America, and that is in the western coast of South America. So
Mm,
that belongs to Peru as well. And Peru, you would have heard, means basically of Machu Picchu, you have heard. So it is a very differently developed civilization compared to rest of the world. It wasn't
mm,
discovered till the 1500s. So they have their own system and everything going on over there. And then the Spanish and Spanish, these people discovered the country, and one of the languages these
so
tribals means they speak is Quechua, and they have their own
mm,
local system and stuff. And once the
mm,
Spanish come in, they notice about the whole area, right? They do their studies, and with the navy also comes in the priest and the missionaries of the church, the Jesuits, they come in. And so one thing they noted was that a tribal community in this eastern slope of the Andes, throughout the Andes, they have this tree called cinchona, and the
mm,
bark of this tree is taken, cut, and dried, and then powdered, and it is used basically as a dye, a red color dye. And there wasn't much medicinal use while when we asked these tribals, and in fact they were not. I mean, I'm not sure if we should call them tribals. I have read like a book published in 1870s, and everywhere they were using it was a very different
it
terminology
is a
that was
very
being used.
problematic area
Yeah,
because
that is
see these people they were invaders basically,
right.
and
So
they
the accounts,
probably like
eh,
you only told like they probably they killed a lot of the indigenous population,
right.
but
So whenever they come, they also bring in a lot of the foreign
mm,
diseases, right? This
mm,
continent
mm,
has been cut off
if they are
completely.
not the
So
virgin population is not exposed,
yeah, so
and
the
again
epidemics
yeah.
come in, and these people bring money also. So you can obviously see the conversions happening.
Mm,
So
mm.
those things are also
It
there,
is a
and
very
these accounts
complicated
are,
topic. Yeah.
yeah, and the accounts are unreliable. So there are two accounts
Mm,
where a medicinal aspect of this bark powder was seen. One was of a Countess Anna, and here also this is pretty much proven to be fake by another recent paper which I had seen. So she's the daughter of a viceroy to Peru, and she had something called the tertian fever, which is a fever once in every 3 days. Right, and now we know what that is, right? That is malaria. We know it now, but
yeah, yeah.
back then it was just continuous fever after fever,
It was just
exactly
a
at every
fever which
third day.
occurred in yeah. Right.
There was no solution. Your natural remedies are not working, and slowly the patient's declining. So they were obviously worried about her, so they asked around, and one of the clinicians, maybe a local, turned into service of the Spanish. He provided a sachet of this bark powder, made them dissolve it in some tonic water, and surprisingly it healed her. This is one account. And there is another account of a similar instance happening with a Jesuit priest. So these two accounts are there. So basically, they found that it is working for fever, mainly tertian fever. And this information, obviously, as things go, gets reported ahead and it's carried over to Europe, and
Exactly.
it goes to the Pope through the peace and to the King through these commanders. So once it reaches there, there are divided opinions right now in Europe. We are talking mid 1600s now. So people who are doctors of the Pope say it's very effective, and people
Mm,
who are doctors of the king say it is not at all effective, it is of no use. This may be because there is no valid, like, preparation, or no
exactly.
proper
Standardization
methodology.
is not there. Like
Yeah, and even the
not
disease is
everybody is
not that
using
well
the
known.
same part. Yeah.
Right, they may be treating some other fever with it, so nothing is known. But it starts to spread, now Pope and King are using it, so it spreads throughout the entire Europe. And English medicine is called English medicine because the main hub of it was England, right? So around the 1650s, it starts to take traction. Some renowned physicians pick up on this powder and start using and experimenting with it. And one of them is Dr. Robert Talbot. Right. So he treats King Charles II with this powder, but he keeps it a secret. He just calls it a magic powder and he treats him. And this story becomes a big thing, right? A king who was sick has gotten well again. So the French call him one of the, I think, not the king, one of the relatives of the king was as such, also gets treated by his medication, and he uses it very sparingly so that he can keep it, the costs and profits, to himself. And so it was not known exactly what he's doing, but people had presumptions that it is the bark he's using. But then once he died, the king in favor and even his students also, they made a publication. The king requested it specifically, so it came down out in the newspaper or whatever was a magazine.
Whatever.
It
In
was
the
a like
manner
a
of public address.
gift from the King Louis the 14th,
Okay.
the solution to cotton or tertian fever. Mix
Mm.
bark powder with, as French things go, wine. That was a secret, basically, as what they are saying. They mix, instead of mixing with tonic water, when you mix it with an alcohol base, obviously some other compounds might be coming out of that, right?
Mhm.
So that once that publication happened, and then the King of England also translates to English and publishes it, and so then it
Mhm.
becomes a huge deal, right? So this happened at around 1680s. After this, everybody started going to, means the Spanish started going to Peru, chopping up these
Mhm.
cinchona trees, and there's a huge industry happening over there. It's the
So
local
there
people.
is this only. I just wanted to ask something. So during
Yeah,
all this time, there is only one known source, or are there like many?
it is mainly, there was only one known source, not Peru exactly, that entire belt of that mountains in the eastern side. So
Yeah,
maybe
so
some
that
other.
must have put a lot of pressure on those
Yeah,
researchers.
there's a huge pressure on the
Yeah.
local this thing. So there's a huge industry also. There are people
Mm.
who they are called cascarias, the ones who cut down this bark. It's a very different process. Obviously, there's
Okay.
renovation in the process also. In some
Mm-hmm.
parts, it used to be sun dried. While in some parts, because of moisture, they used to put it in a hut and
Mm-hmm.
then wait for the bark to dry.
Mm-hmm.
So these things don't happen, but people started to realize that this source and the demand is not matching. I mean, to some extent, it was
Mm-hmm.
matching, but for now, it was matching. There
But
wasn't
then again,
some great
people
demand,
did
right?
want more of this. Yeah.
And it's also expensive. You're bringing it all the way from Peru, so not everyone
Mm-hmm.
can afford it. But at the same time, so the French start researching it. They send their botanists, and it gets famous. In the 1730s, there are accounts of the tree in detail, and in fact, the entire genus Cinchona was written in detail by our very own Carolus Linnaeus. We have read in bio.
The,
Yeah,
yeah.
so in
Everybody cursed
1754,
him.
yeah, the side of bio that every, I mean, I think there are people who like the plant diversity
I
and all these
personally
things.
did like.
I
I
don't know.
personally liked it, but
I wasn't a huge fan. Families and this thing and all.
no, I scored because of that.
You know which family does this belong to? I had read it. I don't recall now. It was, I think it was something common only. I don't remember. Yeah, so then it becomes the mainline thing. And but people start to realize that what is it exactly in this bark that is actually, like, around 1800s, even chemistry was evolving, right? So two French chemists and researchers, Pierre Pelletier and Joseph Cavendish, they first isolated the quinine compound from the bark of this tree, quinine, from cinchona. So in 1820, this was discovered, and there is a lot of things here, like how the name quinine came about and things like that from the genus and stuff like that. But basically, it started becoming mainline. Instead of the powder, we started using quinine, and
Okay.
we realized that this is definitely effective. And
So
malaria is,
this is the concentrate kind of thing of
yeah,
the
it is
same
basically
powder.
the
Again,
principle which is actually
quin-
causing the effect, right? From the bar, the other
quinine
rest
is a
of it.
natural derivative. It is not synthetic.
No, no, it is not synthetic. From the bar powder, they're refining the quinine that they're able to do. They are, that is also there, like in detail. I read a pharmacopoeia published in 1875, and there was a lot of means things which looked like French to me. It was English, but being in medicine, I had no idea. They went into detail of the
Mhm.
pharmacy aspect of it. So it started being around the mid 1850, around 1850, it started being used for malaria prophylaxis widely. And
Okay.
as the demand increased, obviously all these big naval empires like the Dutch and even the British later started to
Mm.
produce this tree everywhere. So the Dutch were the main people who basically found Java to be a great area to grow the tree. And 97% of the
Java is a
world's,
place.
Java is an island,
Java. Acha.
one of the Indonesian islands, right?
Okay.
So it grows, like 97% of the world's quinine production was controlled by the Dutch in the by the 1900s starting. Then the war started, the World War, and in the World War, what basically happened was a lot of powers started interacting with each other, but the quinine
mm,
was controlled by the Dutch, and in Indonesia,
mm,
right, it's growing. So at some point, the Germans took over the Dutch, the entire Netherlands, and Japan also took over
mm.
Indonesia. So the entire supply to the Allied powers of quinine
Okay.
became limited, and this is all the naturally derived quinine. So people started hunting for an
Mm,
alternative to quinine, but they were not able to find anything. And they and actually, why did the demand increase in the war is the real question. And this whole war and medicine is such a complex and very interesting topic to study, and very sad also sometimes to study, because the diseases change, the epidemiology changes everything, and the politics and access also to medicines and stuff changes. At the same time, the you want to keep your troops alive, so the research also increases. So war in
exactly.
general is such a big
It
propagator.
has been a
Yeah,
driver of surgery as well.
yeah,
So I guess the
okay,
whole advances in blood transfusion and storage,
right.
uh, like war has given us. The war is a platform where surgery is performed in a very hasty, very practical kind of manner. So again, trauma management and all that part, it pose a
Triaging.
huge part, triaging and all. So the whole systems of trauma, the principles of trauma management,
It
they
is
can be
quite
traced back
fascinating,
to their. It is
right?
actually very fascinating.
There's a lot of levels to it. So one level is definitely
Mm,
this. Between 1942 to 45, malaria was the most serious health hazard to the Allied troops in the South
mm,
Pacific area. So we have a huge battlefield which is happening in the
mm,
Pacific Ocean, right? One side you have US and one side you have Japan. So the Allied powers actually in the Pacific area, especially, malaria caused 5 times as much casualties as the war itself.
mm,
And now you would think that, okay, the Americans, we can understand why they are suffering. But even the Japanese, like soldiers, they did not know how to use quinine despite having a lot of it.
okay.
They did not know the correct dosing, how to use it for prophylaxis or what to do. And this is when actually, if you look into the maritime documents of these naval doctors, you can look into like the detail of how they start different doses of quinine and how they go about trying to treat them and all. They're still searching for an alternative, but they don't have it. And sadly, the reality is, even immediately after World War One itself, the German government had started to look into these alternatives for quinine. And chloroquine, which is the synthetic analog with the exact same mechanism as quinine, was actually completely discovered by the Germans, Hans Andersag and his co-workers at Bayer Labs in 1934. And we all know how, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows, but
I
Bayer
mean,
and
I don't know
German
for that
research,
much.
yeah, German research is really
Yeah, I
dark.
know that there were some issues.
Some
Some, not some.
issues
There were a lot.
is putting
There
it
were a lot
lightly.
of issues, but
A lot of issues. Like the worst, probably you could say that humanity has faced, especially considering ethics. That's why after the war you had the Nuremberg Code, and the whole ethics saga started to build up quite well. So they had discovered resocin and santocin, which is basically chloroquine, and they were giving it to their troops in secret. And as the war ended, USA got this drug from some of their troops in Africa, and they took it back home, and then they reverse engineered it. And so this is how basically chloroquine came into existence. A bit of a mix of observation, probably, of these tribal practices in another country, in another continent, and then its
in
development
another
in
time,
another continent, and then its need in another ocean, another area, and finally discovery, or means getting it secretly out of Africa. So over all these different continents, this drug has just gone through so many years,
it
400 years.
basically the drug traveled the continents after they diseased it, and then
Right.
came back, and in
Actually, in
many different
Africa,
forms.
yeah, in Africa, malaria itself and sickle cell, that whole relation which
Yeah,
has
so
played out in
the
Africa as well. So that is another story for another day. So basically, now we have chloroquine, which can be used for treatment of malaria, amoebic liver abscess. It was used for, and then its derivatives like hydroxychloroquine, which we still use today as a immunosuppressant. I am not going to go into the detail of pharmacology of chloroquine, like the mechanism of action and etc., because that as medicine again. We are only going to focus on the history aspect of it. So even in COVID-19, if you remember all those theories of using
was thought
hydroxychloroquine,
to be, yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure it didn't pan out basically, but yeah, it does have
It
some
didn't. Yeah.
a very very intricate mechanism of action actually, and I don't want to go into the detail of it, but basically even now we don't know exactly what levels of mechanism. Some part of it we don't know, and one
So a
interesting
lot
point
is
is
there to be explored.
yeah,
After
so
400 years also we can
400
say
years
that.
also. Right.
Mm,
And one distillate which was formed while making this chloroquine, one of the distillates was nalidixic acid, which is the main like
okay.
father drug for all our quinolones, like fluoroquinolones, which most of us have or at least taken one of these in our life, like ciprofloxacin,
In our eye
norfloxacin for
drops or
UTI, yeah,
as
moxifloxacin,
tablets.
and
Mm.
even levofloxacin we give for tuberculosis, pneumonia,
Use this in
meningitis,
use this in eye drops or to
yeah,
treat urinary tract infections.
UTI, right. So all of these we
The
use it
point being, a drug which was discovered 400 years ago
is
had
being
traveled the world and is being constantly researched, has appeared in many different forms and dosages, and
right.
there is still a lot to be explored.
Yeah,
So
there is no
drug
end.
discovery is not, yeah, exactly. So the development of a drug is not a, like a eureka moment. It is a very slow agonizing path which every researcher, every patient and clinician and everybody has to walk together.
Right. So that is there, and this actually is not completely related to it, other than it being related to the same disease. I just wanted to briefly talk about another drug development for malaria, which was done by the Chinese chemist or doctor Tu Yu. Tu Yu, she won a Nobel Prize for her work. Basically, she read into Chinese history, herbal history, which was a text about like 1400-year-old texts, etc. She was just going through it. And why she was going through it is chloroquine was discovered, as we have seen, in like 1934, but it was just used, and we did not have this. It was the new. Penicillin was also discovered, and all these
Mm.
drugs, antibiotics, were discovered in a spree in the mid 1950s, and immediately, I mean, I think, and many of these drugs like methicillin, they all got resistance within like the first year itself of its use. And this concept was not there only ki there could be something like antibiotic resistance, and even to this day so many drugs are
Exactly.
getting out of
They
use.
are not. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, China had this whole the Hunan Island or Hunan Island had an epidemic of chloroquine resistant malaria, and you had these 20 patients which were near their deathbed, and there was no escape, there was no way to treat them, and even other places, this whole scene was going on. So, you decided that okay, let me look into what else I can find other than chloroquine, and there was this Chinese herb which was, I think, derived from a tree. I do not recall the exact name of the tree. I'm doing this in like a very brief way, going through this. So she
Mhm.
found out in the history that the way she was brewing the leaves, like she was boiling it and then she was extracting the compounds. In the textbook, it was written that do not boil it and directly just dissolve it in water or dissolve it in alcohol, this thing, and take it out. So she tried that out. She tried the resultant medicine on herself and a few of her colleagues, and she found out it was safe for use, and then she applied it to all these patients and many of them recovered. And basically this is how artemisinin, the drug which we use today as a mainline drug for malaria treatment, was discovered, again because of maybe you can say her interest or the need of that time. But because those historical texts were preserved and she knew that they existed and she went through them,
Yeah.
we got artemisinin, which is the mainline drug. We use ACT right now for almost all malaria cases. We give
Mm.
it within
In
three
all
days. You have,
resistant cases, it is the first line drug, I guess.
yeah, and within 3 days you have your means within 3 days the malaria is somewhat treated. And she won a Nobel Prize for this same discovery in 2015. So history has its importance in various levels, right? Many levels. One of them is obviously to look into all these vegetable or we would say plant-based medicines, which were the main medicines which reached around, which changed the whole medicine scene during the war and
Mm.
after the World Wars. So that's why I thought I'll take this topic. I feel like it's a bit drier compared to like some things. Maybe even Tuyu story on her own might have been more interesting. But this was actually why I
Uh,
chose this topic
but
was
the story does it justice to this topic because we are talking about history and see
right.
history. We saw how history is important in the case of UVO and even
Yeah.
if we study history meticulously, it might provide answers to the most basic of
Yeah,
questions and
means, but I
most
don't want that to be the main reason you read history. I just actually came across this piece because one of my family friends, their son was a volunteer to South Sudan, and he had not taken chloroquine, and he got basically cerebral malaria, and that really impacted his life. And then randomly, I don't know how half of the time I do not know how I fall into these like Wikipedia or whatever death traps of this history, and then
but it's
I'm
good that we fall into these traps and
I
then
don't know
we
if
have
it
a
is
lot
good
to
or
talk
bad,
about.
but I do want to share that there is a world out there. I didn't know about this, right? In first year, we are just flipping BDC or
Exactly, yeah.
flipping your
Or
Guyton or whatever.
Triparty
Yeah, we don't look
second
into
year.
this aspect much. So I feel like this is a good thing.
So
Like
it was a
for,
really fascinating part,
yeah,
and again, this opens up new avenues for discussion, like the whole role of war in surgery and how
yeah,
the ethical part of the where lab or
yes,
laboratory.
definitely.
I don't know anything about that.
So many branches
I've
out
just
of it.
heard that I've just heard that there are some human rights violations in the, which happened. But again,
Huge human right
fascinating
violation.
story about this guy.
So you have the whole ethics Nuremberg Code, and later on, whatever
Mhm.
developed, you have the whole epidemics of war, epidemics of invasion. Means invasion, you
Yeah,
would say
yeah.
Western invasion.
So again, a very fascinating subtopic which
So
we
many things come out
discussed
of
in
it,
some other day.
right?
But yeah, so the whole journey from like 1500s to the present day, which is still going on. uh,
Right. Have you
The
had any of these
we saw.
antibiotics I mentioned?
I've had levofloxacin first.
You had
We
ofloxacin
gave.
also, no? Recently.
Ofloxacin also. I had.
Hmm.
So again, these
Yeah.
are very common. This thing, no?
I mean, I'm pretty sure all of us, most of us have had these. Yeah, so it is quite fascinating.
Fortunately,
I
I've
don't
not
know.
been treated for malaria.
Okay. Okay, so this was
Exactly.
basically
So
our discussion into medical history. We do not know how you will find it, and I think it has already exceeded all the time limits we had for it quite clearly.
So future
So,
episodes, we are planning to be a bit concise, and this was look. We're not operating out of a very rigid structure. We're just like
and
initially
also, yeah,
we're
and we
just
are,
keeping it a bit like the way we talk to each other at college. So
yeah, I
it is
think that
kind
has
of
not
like
come
we
through mainly because we are recording at 2 a.m. and also we had to, it's a
that is
very different
also another point.
experience recording the camera and things like that. So
Yeah,
just
but
we hope you had fun listening to all this, and I guess it might be a little bit boring, but give us time. We are training ourselves in this, and please
yeah,
do
we are also new and
share this content with anybody else who you might think would find it interesting, and do share your thoughts, and maybe means tell us how we can improve this whole experience. And
yeah, the comment section is open for both good and bad comments. So
yes.
we are eagerly waiting, and that is all from my side.
Uh, yes, that's it. We are working on some other interesting things. Medical history is not the main content of our channel. It's just one of the many things we'll be talking about. So just stay tuned. And we do not have any social media yet. I don't know if we'll have it.
I don't have any
I
social
just
media.
realized. Okay. So we'll just end this at this point. So look forward to our next episode. So bye.
Thank
This
you.
was the Undoctored podcast.